Hey everybody, welcome to another How to Succeed podcast. I'm your host, Mike Montague, and my guest this week is Dan Solin. You can find him at askdansolin.com because we're talking about his new book, Ask How to Relate to Anyone. And the following podcast is copyrighted by Sandler Systems Inc., protected by U.S. copyright law. Sandler is the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training. You all have made this podcast really popular. 3 million downloads and 600 episodes, and I'm so excited to celebrate with you all. But if for any reason you are not subscribed to the podcast yet, do that wherever you are watching or listening right now. We're going to talk about how to succeed at relating to anyone with Dan Solin. Here we go. All right, Dan, tell me a little bit about the new book, Ask, and how do we relate to absolutely anybody?
So I'll tell you why I wrote Ask, Mike, but first let me just thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward very much to this podcast. I was a financial advisor, but I was one who had written 2 New York Times bestselling books. So unlike a lot of my colleagues, I got a lot of very nice inquiries of people who would say, I've read your book. Would you consider managing my money? And to give you the Reader's Digest version of this story, I found I wasn't better at sales at converting than any of my colleagues who didn't get such warm leads. And I just thought there's something wrong with my process. And I had generated roughly, to give you some numbers, $55 million of assets under management in the previous 5 years. I took a year and did research on what's going on in people's brains while I'm talking. Is there a better way to convert prospects into clients? Did all the research that's in an extensive bibliography in Ask, spent another 6 months to 9 months implementing my new process, which was the opposite of my old process. And in that fairly short period of time, generated $100 million of business. So I thought, okay, I think I really have something. Maybe this is a book. And so I wrote Ask.
Yeah, I love that because David Sandler basically did the same thing in the 60s. He was struggling with the spray and pray or the tell and sell approach. And it really works just well enough for people to keep doing it, I think. But your book and the stuff we're going to talk about today relates exactly to the Sandler selling system of, I think, a couple of things: bonding and rapport, how to connect and relate to anybody, but also how to really qualify and convince allow somebody else to discover that they're a good fit for you, because we kind of believe that you can't sell anybody anything. You can't convince them of changing their mind. They're the only ones that can do that. And the better way to do that is really to ask them questions to help them maybe discover something that they don't know about themselves, their situation, or your product. When you think about common misconceptions in sales, what are most people doing wrong? Let's set that up first.
I think most people, me included, feel that what I'm saying is much more important than what I'm hearing. And I think because we are advisors, or I was a financial advisor. Before that, I was a lawyer. If you have specialized knowledge in something and people come to you, it's only natural to assume they're interested in what you have to say. That's the basic misconception. They are not interested at all in what you have to say. They're only interested in, can you solve my problem? That's very different. And the only way you can find out what their problem is to ask them questions. But before you ask them questions, you have to establish some emotional connection. So the big epiphany and the big takeaway with Ask is that interpersonal relations are a science. It isn't, I meet Mike for the first time, I show up, he talks, I talk, whatever happens, happens, let's hope for the best. That's what I thought it was, but it isn't. There's a science to interpersonal relations. It's set forth in hundreds of academic studies in the fields of psychology and neuroscience, and that's the premise of Ask.
I love that. And we were talking a little bit about my book, LinkedIn the Sandler Way, before we got started here. And we put in that one. I think it's really interesting, even when using digital tools, that you ask people what their preferred method is. Like if you're only using the tool that you like, if you're a baby boomer and you're picking up the phone every time, you're a Gen Xer and you're only doing email, or you're a Gen Z and texting, and millennials texting, Gen Z doing a direct message on Slack or something, you're only relating to the people that like and prefer those methods. But everybody has their own personal style. So generations tend to prefer the ones that they grew up with. But for me, it's really interesting that you can just ask. You meet a new prospect for the first time, you can say, "Hey, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Should I email, call, text message? What do you prefer?" And they go, "Oh, definitely don't email me. I have 1,000 unread messages, and my admin checks those for me. Give me a call or text my cell phone, and I can usually text a reply." And it makes your life so much easier, and it makes your relationship with that person so much better. I think that's just a small example. Do you have a favorite example of maybe questions we should ask or how we should think about relating to these people?
Well, first, let me just say that what you just said is actually very profound, and it comes under the category of making no assumptions. We tend to believe that whatever we're doing is the right way and the only way. And we tend to make assumptions about people based on a lot of input that we get, the way they look, the way they act, their facial expression, their clothes. So we make all kinds of assumptions. One of the assumptions that's very easy to make is, well, everybody emails, so obviously I'm going to email. Right? I really loved what you just said. Look what happens when you make no assumptions when you meet somebody. You make no assumptions, you put your agenda aside, and you just start with some basics like what you just said. How would you like me to communicate with you? That creates such a positive environment of, oh, he actually really cares about what I think and what my feelings are. It's not all about him. It turns out he's interested in me. So that's a great way. Your example is better than any I could have come up with.
Well, I don't know about that. You got some great stuff in the book, but I think those are interesting because, well, questions in general are just fascinating. So I'll let you pick our next topic. When you think about behavior and how we do the right thing at the right time, what comes to mind here for our goals, plans, and actions of how we relate to anybody we're trying to talk to, whether it's a prospect or an employee, if we're the leader?
So I think first is confronting some misconceptions that we have, which is facts persuade people. If I'm logical and rational, I can marshal the facts in a certain way, I'll be able to persuade people. Again, what I'm saying is more important than what I'm hearing. I mean, it turns out, here's what the data tells us about why do people hire us or somebody else instead of us. The data is really very clear. They hire us because they like us. If they like us, they trust us. If they like and trust us, they hire us. So to me, when I was doing the research was, oh, I think I'm doing this all wrong. I'm marshaling all these facts in favor of a certain style of investing. I'm showing how qualified I am. And I'm presenting all this to them, expecting them to say, I'm persuaded, sign me up. It's not working. So instead of doing that, my goal is to be likable. How do I do that? I mean, I'm an introvert. Introverts are, you're an extrovert. It seems to me, just from a quick read. So for introverts, being likable is actually more challenging because we don't like to talk. We don't like to talk about ourselves. We're not as charismatic as extroverts. We don't like being the center of attention. I mean, there are a lot of things that differentiate us. There are a lot of positives to being an introvert and to being an extrovert. But it turns out that the way to get people to like you, and this was a major epiphany, is to empower them to talk about themselves. There is nothing that people enjoy more than talking about themselves. And when I step back and look at that prospect relationship, it seems to me what it came down to was, if I can empower, well, it came down to this. When I meet people for the first time, like when I met you at our pre-interview for the first time, it wouldn't be normal if I was trying to become your financial advisor. Say, hi, Mike, did you bring your tax returns with you and other personal financial information? If I met you socially, what I would do would be to say, so Mike, tell me a little bit about yourself. And you being an extrovert, you would love that question and you would tell me a lot about yourself. Me being an introvert, I don't love that question. So I might be more reluctant. I might say to you, so Mike, tell me what you would like to know. What would you like to know? Meaning, I'll tell you a slice, but you're not going to get Dan Solin 101. If you want to know how I got started writing books, I'll tell you that. But I only want to talk about very narrow aspects. So empowering people to talk about themselves is the shortest distance between creating an emotional connection, likability, and trust.
I love all of that. Three things jumped out for me. One is don't try and get married on the first date, right? We need to be likable enough to maybe get a phone number, and likable enough on the phone to get a meeting, likable enough in the first meeting to get a second meeting, and somewhere down the line we can get married. I always love that dating analogy, and we're coming up on Valentine's Day, so we're doing a special webinar on that topic. It'll be fun. Second thing that I thought was really interesting is I think it's Stephen Covey, but I might be wrong on this one, that people don't care what you know until they know how much you care. And so I think getting that order right is important in behavior here, that facts and figures and data and case studies are great at the end of the process, when you have to do some social proof, or when you're making maybe a business case for things, but nobody cares about that up front until they know that there's something in it for them, that you understand their problem, that you have something that they believe could solve it. Then maybe they want some social proof, testimonials, case studies, or they want to know how it works. But that's usually way, way, way after you understand them, their problem, the budget they have, how they're going to make a decision. Then we can share some of those facts and figures. But the thing that I think is most interesting, and the audience agrees here, because John Piper has a question for you, but the introverted part, most people think extroverted salespeople are better, but there's a reason why I'm in marketing talking about sales than on our enterprise sales team, Dan. And that's because extroverted people don't shut up long enough to let the other person talk. So introverts, I feel like, actually have an advantage in sales relationships and in service roles or customer success, because they're going to let that other person have the spotlight. They're going to let that person talk, and they can be patient enough to listen to the answers. So can you tell us a little bit about how you think about being an introvert? Do you feel like you just have to be extroverted enough to ask those questions, or was there something maybe that you needed to work on in order to be successful?
So there are a lot of misconceptions about introverts and extroverts. And one of the basic misconceptions, I think, is what you just expressed, that extroverts are better at sales than introverts, and that introverts that we're painfully shy. If I was painfully shy, I wouldn't be on this podcast, right? So first of all, most of us are on the spectrum. We're not extreme introverts or extreme extroverts. We're somewhere in the middle. I will say that teaching my sales training is easier when I'm teaching an introvert. When I look in the camera and I see an introvert on the other side of the screen, and what I'm thinking is, this is actually going to be pretty easy, because as introverts, as I mentioned, we're not excited about dominating conversations. We don't interrupt. And it comes when I figured out, like, I used to find large social gatherings very challenging. I don't like being in a large group, right? I love being one-on-one, or if we have another couple over for dinner, that's my ideal evening. If my wife, who's also an introvert, if she were to say to me, Dan, good news, we're going to a huge New Year's Eve party, I would be, what can I do to get out of this, right? So when I used to give talks, love giving the talk, but the networking event after, very challenging for me. Noise, overstimulation, whatever. So what I found is that for introverts, to just say, look, relax in these occasions, because if somebody comes up to you, all you have to do is don't try to be the most interesting person, be the most interested, be the most curious person in the room. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. If you're the smartest person in the room, it's going to be very difficult for you to get
a better room.
You can't be the smartest. Yes, good point. You can't. It's very difficult to be the smartest person and get the business. So if you want to get the business, you need to be the most interested and most curious. Extroverts are very trainable, however. They're very trainable. because once you teach them that you take that pressure. Extroverts feel they have to entertain us, right? And we don't have to be entertained. And once you show them the power of focusing on other people, you see a tremendous transformation. It's very validating and rewarding.
That was really, really good. And yes, I found some interesting things too about personalities that, as an entertainer, a lot of entertainers are actually introverts. If we were
Yeah,
extroverts, we would be out in the party, but we feel more comfortable on stage by ourselves than we do out in the crowd with hundreds
yeah.
of people. And same thing, I was in radio and obviously podcasting and stuff. So that's really interesting. And I think the same thing is true in sales. I'll just second everything you said there. But when we get to our technique bucket here, what are some of your favorite questions to ask? I think this is a great place to start.
So there are different stages of the relationship. There are different stages of a meeting. So let's take the first stage. Somebody shows up. Under my process, your goal is not to impose anything on that other person. You're there to find out how you can help them. But the first thing I like to do is say, so Mike, tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, how did you become a podcast expert? And what you mentioned several times that you're an entertainer. Tell me more about that. And as an extrovert, you're likely to respond positively to that. But as an introvert, as I indicated, you might not. And my job is not to force you to talk about yourself, but just to show an interest in you. And if I sense that you're reluctant to talk about yourself, then I'm going to say something like this. What is it that you would like to talk about? Or how can I make this meeting as productive as possible for you? Let me tell you a quick story of how salesmen screw up. So a financial advisor told me this story. He's meeting with a very nice couple, first meeting. He does his whole thing where he lectures, educates, whiteboard, PowerPoint, 55 minutes. And 5 minutes left, he says, do you guys have any questions? We have a few minutes left. The wife turns to the husband and says, do you think we have enough time to talk about the special needs trust for our autistic son? Because that's why we're here. When I heard that story, it's like, how many times is that repeated that we pass like ships in the night? Getting back to your point about assumptions, right? Why do we assume that people are interested in what we have to say? We play the same tape for everybody. Some people have very specialized needs. So why not just ask them, what would you like to talk about? I'm happy to talk about anything you want to talk about. And by the way, let me go back, Mike. I loved your reference to dating because I use that all the time. On the first date, I always say this, on the first date, did you bring a friend? People look at me like, why would I bring a friend? Okay, so why do you have somebody else in the room when you're meeting with a prospect? It's very difficult to make an emotional connection when there are three people in the room, especially when one is frantically making notes. And then I go to the second point. On the first date, did you make notes? Again, people look at me like, why would I make notes? And I say, okay, did you forget anything? Like, how long ago was that? They'll say, oh, 15 years ago. Do you remember that first date? Yeah, I remember it really well. So don't make notes. Is it impossible for you to just have a nice conversation with somebody? And what was the purpose of that first date? It was just to get to know each other, to see if we had anything in common, to see if we should have a second date. Okay, well, that's what the first meeting with a prospect should be like.
I love that. What about, let's go towards the end. So Sandler does a lot of work in the middle of the funnel of, figuring out their pain budget decision, like I mentioned earlier. What about towards the end? What are some of your favorite questions if you do have somebody that is interested and they're ready to go?
So this is the most controversial part of my research, right? Salespeople feel that they have to spin things in a certain way and they have to have certain program questions in order to get to where they want to go. And what I say is trust the person in front of you. They're not stupid. They know why they're there. If you've done what I've said and you have created an environment where they know that you're interested in them and you've shut up long enough to let them talk and express themselves, whatever it is, the only question you have to ask at the end is this: how would you like to proceed? They'll tell you exactly how they'd like to proceed. We tend to make this process incredibly complicated. I've trained thousands of people all over the world. This isn't just me musing and hoping something works. When you trust them, they know how they want to proceed. They'll say, sign me up, or I'd like to think about it, or I'd like to have a second meeting. And whatever they say, you say, fine.
Dan, I think that is awesome. And you might need to become a Sandler trainer here, because that's right out of the book. And David Sandler had a rule. He had a funny way to say it, that the best presentation you'll ever give, the prospect will never see. If you did so good at asking questions, they don't even need to see a proposal. They don't need next steps. They don't need the flashy big bang. You just say, what would you like to do next? And they go, well, I guess we should get started. And you skip the whole presentation dog and pony show and get right to doing what they need to do.
I'd love to meet him, because we're definitely kindred spirits, because I couldn't agree with those observations more. In fact, I've had salespeople, they don't like to be called that. I've had financial advisors snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. They say, exactly. How would you like to proceed? The prospect says, sign me up. How do I get started? Because they think getting started is much more challenging than it really is. And this guy reported to me that what he said to him was, don't you want to know like how I want to invest and what I do and what my qualifications are? And that started down a slippery slope from which he could not recover, because now you're raising no end of issues. When they say that, you say, fine, let's proceed in that way. When you trust somebody, you don't say to your dentist, right, what size drill are you going to be using? Or why are you doing X? Or you trust that person. And this process, and it sounds like the Sandler process does the same thing, maybe even better. The Sandler process and my process are both geared towards instilling trust. When we trust people, we don't need to know how the sausage is made. We just know we're in good hands and they're going to take care of us.
I love it. Again, you can find Dan at askdansolin.com. The new book is Ask How to Relate to Anyone. He also has like 2 New York Times bestsellers, the smartest book series you will ever find. I'll put that in there. You can go to danielsolin.com to find more about the other books, or look those up wherever books are sold as well. But Dan, I wanted to get to know you a little bit better here. So now it's time for me to ask you my cheesy job interview questions. The first one is, at this point in your career, you've mentioned you've sold like 100 million in business. You've written best-selling books. How do you define success?
Lack of anxiety and contentment. I mean, to me, I think people have their eye on the wrong ball. I don't mean to be glib when I say that. Like, I've achieved a certain level of financial success, and having not achieved that, I would be unhappy. And it permits me and my wife to have a nice style of life, and we get satisfaction from that. But to me, and I don't like to philosophize, but the game of life is really about, at one point, being content. And I find what's called the practice of gratitude very, very powerful. Thinking every day, look how lucky I am. I get to talk to you today, right? I get to talk to your audience today. How fortunate that is. I don't have to think about what will come of this. Will my book sales go up? I just get to think about, well, this is nice. I get to talk to a really smart person who's with a really prestigious company. We seem to be kindred spirits. They have a large audience. Other people are going to hear me. Maybe I'll impact somebody in a positive way. So to me, contentment is the key to happiness.
That's awesome. That's a really good answer. Now, the next one is, what was your failure you are most proud of, or your biggest lesson learned along the way? What did you have to get over in order to be successful?
I think for me, and it was a process of self-awareness. So I read this book, Quiet, by Susan Cain, Cain, which is the definitive book on introverts and extroverts. Everybody should read that book. Previous to that, I thought I was just weird, because a lot of my beliefs and feelings were not mainstream at all. Like, I don't find fun in what most people find fun, and I enjoy immensely things that most people would find to be drudgery, like writing. I like solitary work. I don't need a lot of interaction with people. So that was once I figured that out, that level of self-awareness, that helped me be comfortable with myself. So that was very important. I think the other thing that was very important to me was discovering that I really could not work for anybody. I've had a very varied career where I have both worked for people and had my own business, and just consistently found that I'm not cut out to work for other people, which says much more about me than about them. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them, but I don't do well at meetings. I don't do well. I'm not a consensus builder. I don't like politics of, the workplace. So just being on my own, those two things, the introvert thing and the being aware that I like eating what I kill. I like that feeling of, oh, my life is based on my own merit. I'm in total control. If I'm a loser, I'm a loser. It's my fault. I can't blame that on anybody else.
Wow, that's interesting. Now, last one is, do you have a favorite quote, motto, or mantra? Is there's some sort of like favorite mission statement or quote that you like to keep in mind?
There is a great quote by Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player. I don't make 100% of the shots I don't take. I love that quote because, most shots you take in life, you don't make. And in my case, I've failed many times, but I've succeeded several times. And the successes have far overcome the pain of the failures. So I've maintained a mindset of intense curiosity and risk-taking, prudent risk-taking. But I think it's that feeling of, yeah, why don't I explore? I'll give you a perfect example. I'm exploring a chat, the new chat online
Yeah,
feature.
ChatGPT.
Blows me away, Mike. I'm just telling you, blows me away. I mean, I'm a writer. So imagine going there and saying, I just did one. I said, what is factor-based investing? Turned out a 500-page blog. Then I went back and said, give me all the sources for what you just wrote. Gives me all the sources. I mean, this to me is the future. I am blown away by it, but maintaining that level of curiosity and risk-taking and trying new things, I think it's the key to life. I really do.
Man, that's so good, and I totally agree with you. I think ChatGPT is a game changer. It's going to be bigger than the internet and stuff eventually. But
Yes.
I do have to question what we're doing as humanity, though, because I saw online that they have a new robot that's made out of a metal that can melt, escape like a cage, and reform as a little Lego like minifigure on the other side of the cage. That's the plot of Terminator 2. Mark Zuckerberg is trying to do Big Brother, and now we have AI and the Matrix set up here as well with OpenAI. I don't think they realized those movies were not aspirational. That's not where
Right.
we wanted to go as humans.
I don't think we know where we're, excuse me. I don't think we
You're all
know
good.
where we're going with this. And you could see it ending humanity like a lot of people have predicted. But you could also see it being, I'm an optimist. I like
Yeah,
to
for
think
sure.
it could be marshaled for good, could make us all better. But I think we'd all better be pretty adaptable because a large segment of the population that's doing kind of lower level work, they're going to clearly be out of a job. And those of us who are doing higher level work are going to have to adapt.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's the way it's always been, whether it was inventing, fire, electricity, the phones, the internet, everybody kind of predicted the end and loss of jobs until they actually learned how to use those tools. And it
Exactly.
turns out people use them for good and they use them to make human beings' lives easier so they can move on to more important or interesting things like relating to other people. So we tie it all up in a nice big bow. Humans still the best at asking questions, using guts and humor to relate to people. So if you found this episode interesting, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast in your favorite app. You can find Dan Solin at askdansolin.com. That's the new book, Ask How to Relate to Anyone. And Sandler has a whole bunch of cool events coming up twice a year. We do a client summit where you can join us and the other top Sandler trainers from around the world. Live or in Orlando in March and then virtual in the fall. Go to sandler.com/summit or just go to sandler.com, find a local training center, or if you have more than one location, reach out to our enterprise team. We would be happy to get you started. Until next time, whatever you are, be a good one. That's what I always say. We'll see you next time. Have a great week, everybody. Good selling.